Lonnie Teper here with the great Rory Leidelmeyer. And Rory, you're not going to remember this. Maybe you will, but I really doubt it. I think it was circa 1976 or so. I had become friends with a guy named Barney Henderson who lived in Whittier.
Oh, Barney.
Remember Barney?
Barney?
And we took his two little sons to the beach. One of those sons ended up becoming Dangerous Dan Henderson, a world champion MMA fighter. So we went to the gym. We stopped off in a gym in Whittier. I don't think it was Uptown Gym. Was there another gym in Whittier?
No, that was actually Tut's Gym. A little hole in the wall on Whittier Boulevard, right next to the Travel Lodge.
Right. Okay, I was in there, and this freak who couldn't have been 18 or 19 years old was next to me. I don't know if it was a Smith machine. I don't remember the exact apparatus, but it was you. And I looked at you and tried to start a conversation, and you thought I was some weirdo, which I was. And so you didn't say much, but I just said, "You're going to be a pro bodybuilder, aren't you?" And you didn't say much. I think you said, "Yeah, I'm going to try, or maybe, or we'll see," something generic like that. And I remember going back to Barney when we left that gym. I said, "Barney, I saw this guy with the greatest physique I've ever seen. And I'm telling you right now, I'm just now learning about bodybuilding. This cat's going to be Mr. Olympia in 3 years." He says, "Oh, that's Rory Leidelmeyer." So that's my first time I ever saw you.
You know that Barney was actually a high school teacher coach for Cal High, and I went to Cal High at the time, and I used to watch Barney do his bicep and the gym, and I would mimic him when he left because he had an awesome physique too. You know, he was ahead of me. So when I looked at Barney, I was like, I got to have that kind of look.
Well, he's the reason I went to my first ever bodybuilding show. We had a mutual friend named Ron Chaffins, and Barney was entering the LA. I believe it was 75 or 76 down in the Grand Auditorium in LA.
Love that place.
Yeah, and that got my first experience to bodybuilding. I never saw so many great physiques in my life. I wanted to crawl in a hole, the rest of the night and watch from afar. But Barney did have he did pass away a couple of years ago, by the way. I didn't keep an
Oh, that's sad to hear.
But remember, he was a great wrestler and a wrestling coach.
Yes, he was a great wrestling coach. And we had him at Cal High. And I guarantee you, when you got in that little sweat box with him, you weren't coming out until you were on all fours crawling.
Yeah, and that sounds like him, because when we went into that gym in Whittier that day, it was like 130 degrees. I said, "This is like torture. I feel like I'm in a camp." He goes, "This is great. This is the way you got to do it," And I, right then and there, in addition to looking at the mirror, I knew that sport wasn't for me. But as a fan, it was. And I became a fan of yours, but I hadn't seen you in a long time because I was in the Pasadena, Alhambra area. You're in Whittier.
Right.
I went to Montebello High School, by the way, which is a opponent of Cal High. And a young lady is subbing for me right now at East LA College to one of my classes. You may know her as Tessa Troglia.
Okay.
Tessa.
Yeah. And you know that, my little one, well, actually my oldest daughter, Sasha.
Yes.
Remember her? Okay. That bodybuilding, no. She's the director of Cerritos College.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. I got old over the years, man. What happened to me? There's still Rory. Yeah, I wanted to talk about more of your competitive career. Let's start with the LA. Was that 79?
That was 1979. Yes, it was. It was approximately a year after Cynthia and I got married. And I told Cynthia, I said, "Look, I'd like to enter one show before we really crystallize my career and what I'm going to do with my future." I had planned on going to LAPD at that time. And I thought, one shot, just let's see what Rory's all about. So I decided to enter the novice LA because I had never competed before. People like you knew me because you came to that little hole in the wall gym, but the world of bodybuilding didn't even know who I was, obviously. And so planning on entering that novice show, I put forth the effort that I needed. But after about 5 weeks, I called up Gold's Gym, who was actually promoting the show. And they said, "Oh, well, we don't have a novice. We're going to go just with the juniors, the seniors and the Southern Cal. Well, Cynthia said, look, you're already dieting. Why don't you just go for it anyway? It's only be one show. So I thought, okay, I'll do the juniors. So about 5 more weeks into it, I call up Gold's Gym to buy a couple tickets. And they said, oh, we're sorry, we don't have the juniors no more. It's going to be the senior LA and the Southern Cal only. Well, I'm dieted 10 weeks into this show. And I thought, well, what do we do now, Cint? She says, it's going to be your only show anyway. Why don't you just do the senior LA? You just want to feel what it's like to be on stage. And I thought, you know what? You're right. A one-shot deal. Let's see what happens. So as I got closer to the Mr. LA contest, and I got to remember, Lon, you know as well as I do, back then, the prestige of the Mr. LA was the win goes to the Cal. Everything back then had a significant reason. You entered this show to compete in a higher level. There wasn't any other shows. So there was the LA, the Southern Cal, the Northern Cal, the Central Cal, and then you entered the Cal. And so we all had our divisions, but there was going to be the best of the best. So going into the senior LA, I knew I was going up against guys that were getting ready for the California, but it didn't matter. I felt I'm just going to do what I'm going to do. My competition isn't on stage. My competition is with myself in the gym, and my presentation will be on stage. So long story of that 79 coming short, I decided, okay, let's do it. I walked on stage, and I believe it changed bodybuilding. I really believe it changed bodybuilding. I mean, bodybuilding had not seen what I presented that night. And I did not know that what I was presenting was anything greater than who I was. And that was from hair to toe. I mean, we took care of the hair, the face, the posing trunks. Before, posing trunks were kind of funky that guys were wearing. So Cynthia and I designed a posing trunk that would fit the body for the aesthetic look. And that was the look I was always looking for, that very beautiful masculine aesthetic look that when that man walked on stage, went, that's it. That's what I want to look like. And so did I achieve it at the Mr. LA contest? I presented what I presented, and it changed the sport, at least in the region, enough to where that was a new look. That was a new look. So the LA did a lot for me. It made me decide, am I going further in the sport or am I going to go in law enforcement? And remember a man, a very close friend of mine, that's actually like a second dad, a great grandfather to my children. Remember Joe Valdez?
I knew Joe very well.
Yeah, Joe was God, man, you know, he had a heart of gold. But he didn't know me. He just knew me as a young man getting ready for a show. And I was at Olympus Health Club, or Olympus was now the turning point where Dr. Wong, remember Dr. Wong and Muscle Digest?
Alhambra. Right.
Yeah, right. And I walked into his place because I was managing Olympus Gym, which is that Whittier facility that you were at. And he said, hey, you look pretty good. And he goes, I said, thank you. And he said, well, you getting ready for anything? And I said, well, there's a man by the name of Jim Morris. Remember Jim?
Yes, I do.
Oh, yeah. So Jim was one of my mentors. And Jim had planned on me competing in a show. So Joe said, well, let me see what you look like. So I went through some posing, and he went, wow, you know what? You move just like Ed Corney. And I said, thank you very much. I said, you know, Ed Corney is the greatest poser of all time. He says, yeah, but that's going to be a problem for you because you're mimicking Ed Corney. And he says, don't mimic anybody in this sport. You have such an aura around you. Just be Rory. And that's what Joe told me at that moment. And that's when I realized that I had something to offer bodybuilding. So even after the LA, Joe came up to me and says, what are you going to do? And Cynthia and Joe looked at me and I said, I got to be the husband that I am, and I'm going to go into law enforcement. And Joe said to Cynthia, well, what do you feel, Cint? Because this is one time in this young man's career that he can make something out of bodybuilding. Bodybuilding can actually get something of a benefit from Rory. And Cynthia looked at me and said, Rory, let's delay going in law enforcement. Let's go bodybuilding, that opportunity to know what Rory's all about. So then I pursued it after the LA. I continued in bodybuilding.
Yeah,
So
there was after the LA, like this new kid on the block. This guy he wasn't 5'6", he wasn't 5'8", he wasn't 5'10". He was 6'1", 6'2", big round, full muscles. And, it was a kind of the combination of everything. And I said to Barney, Barney, I'm hearing about that Leidelmeyer kid we saw in the gym a few years ago. I told you that guy's going to be Mr. Olympia. No one could beat this guy. Look at it all. And so you entered the Cal the next year. And what went down at the Cal?
At the Cal, it was very interesting because the confidence I had was, I'm going to change the sport. I'm not going to win or make some magazine covers. I'm going to change the sport. I'm going to show what a man's physique is supposed to really look like: aesthetic, symmetry. When I was a kid, and don't get me wrong on this, it was a naive kid saying this to himself. At 6'1.5", I wanted every woman to want me, and I wanted every man to want to look like me. Now, that's not being conceited or narcissistic. That was just the look I wanted. I wanted that look. And so that's what I worked for. So when I was getting ready for the Cal, all I cared about was getting that masculine beauty up there on stage. And so that was my goal at the Cal. And I went up against some guys that I thought, my gosh, what am I doing up here? But then I remembered, I'm not up here to compete against them. I'm up here to show what Rory is all about. And the people that were on stage were favorites for the Mr. America for the Cal. That was Gary Leonard and John Brown. And they were awesome physiques.
And John Brown, who was in that show?
Yeah, John was in that show. John ended up getting second. Gary ended up getting third. Gary went on to do the America that same year and won. John and I are really close friends. We were highly competitive in the sense of he wanted to know who Rory was because he saw something in Rory that he knew that made bodybuilding look for the future. I saw something in John that I knew bodybuilding needed for the future. And that would made us competitive in such a way that we would look side-eye at each other. But eventually, after a couple conversations, we found out that, you know what? You're John, I'm Rory, and let's make bodybuilding a better world for the next generation to come with us.
Rory,
I won the Cal.
I want to back up a little bit, just to go back to your high school. I left out, you did play football at Cal High, didn't you? Were you a quarterback?
Yeah. Yes. Lonnie, football was my world from the very get-go. When I was a little boy, there was a man across the street from a little cul-de-sac that we lived. And my father, we come from the old country. We come from Europe. And before even Europe, we come from Indonesia. And so from Indonesia to Holland and then into America. So my father was into soccer, European football. And this individual across the street was a graduate from USC, and he had this big old football. And he said, what I want you to do is I want you to run down the street and you make sure this football doesn't hit the pavement because it's made out of leather and it'll tear it up. So my goal was to make sure that football didn't hit the pavement. I caught that football, broke my thumb, but I caught that football. And from that moment on, I wanted to make sure I never dropped the ball. And the only way I could have done that is continue to practice. And so I excelled in football to a place where I believed I was going to go into scholarships and gradually going into pro football. And as that little boy in me, and I was going to make the Hall of Fame. What I'm getting at is I never looked at the little part of it. I always looked at the end part. How do I get to that end part? So by my freshman year in football, I could kick a football out of the end zone. I can kick 40, 50-yard field goals. I can kick them with my left or my right. I could throw a ball with my left. I could throw a ball with my right. I could run a 4.6 my freshman year. But how did I get there? Practice. I practiced when the whole world around me was doing other things. But by the time my senior year came and I was at Cal High, I tore a femur and nobody knew really what was going on because I went from running, from kicking, from throwing, to looking like football Division I was going to be handed to me, to, accidents happen. And they didn't do MRIs back then. And they just thought that Rory didn't care. And that's what hurt the most out of high school, is that Rory cared so much that Rory became an angry young man, because Rory didn't understand that if you put all your effort into something, you should get the result. Of course, now Rory understands you control the effort, but you do not control the result.
To the bodybuilding end of things, you probably had a great physique even as a senior and senior in high school. Did people comment about you even in high school? Like, look at this.
I already had a physique my sophomore year.
Yeah, you probably had a physique.
Freshman, sophomore year, I'd walk into school and people were like, what the heck? Because, see, when I first started playing around with weights, I was 5, 6 years old. I would go with my dad. When we moved to Sacramento, we went to a little health club, and I could smell that smell even now when we talk about it, because it was like a Jack LaLanne health spa. You know how those places smelled? And my dad would be training. There were people like Chuck Sipes. Mike Dadigan was his training partner. Bill Pearl was sitting in the gym training with these guys. These were like men's men. And I'd be sitting on those little roller things that you sit on your butt. It's supposed to take fat off your butt. Now here I am at 5 years old, 6 years old, playing with that, a little shifty thing you put around your waist. And I thought, you know what? Those are the men I want to look like one day. Those are men's men. And they eventually would come to my dad and my mom, and they had barbecues, and I'd sit there and watch these guys. And I thought, that's what it's all about. That's what life's all about. Camaraderie, guys getting together with their wives and kids, having barbecues, enjoying life, and at the same time having a common interest and building a physique that has a character and integrity to it that says, look at me, I do the work. That's what I wanted to be when I was growing up. So yeah, by my freshman, sophomore year, I had a physique. But I'm going to tell you some things. It's kind of funny at this moment in my life. My dad wore a sizes bigger t-shirt, and I wanted to look so big that I actually cut the tag off my dad's t-shirt and sew it onto my t-shirt and tell my buddies, hey, look, I've gone from a medium to a large.
Well, what were you in high school? 180 pounds? 180, 190?
Well, yeah, I fluctuated a lot in high school. I had a lot of situations in high school that were great, were positive, and a lot of times somewhat difficult. So my weight fluctuated because, God, we're going to talk about something that's really deep to me. My dad and I, we butted heads a lot. And I moved out in my high school years.
Oh, you did?
I worked part-time. Yeah, I worked part-time in high school. I worked part-time in 2 jobs, 4 hours, 4 hours. So that wasn't 4-hour part-time. That was a full-time job, plus going to high school. So I gave away football. I gave away football not only because of the torn muscle, but the opportunity to rehab and move forward with football. I did go to Rio Hondo 1 year, and I went out for the football team.
I taught there 1 year. Nobody was built like that there, I'll tell you that.
And so the kid from Santa Fe was a quarterback, and the coach let me in as a wide receiver. And the kid goes, Rory, I know you already. Just run. I'll try to throw the ball as far as I can. Hopefully I get to you. And I ran, and I caught that football right before I got in the end zone, made a touchdown, but I felt the leg not doing too well. And I thought, no, I can't go any further with this. So I quit football. And I put the same effort I had in football, the same mentality into bodybuilding. And I wanted my dad to say, wow, Rory, you know what? I value what you do. I value what you do. I need my dad's validation. My dad was a bodybuilder, but he never competed. And I thought, if I can just compete one day, my dad can see himself on stage through me. And that's how I started my career.
Let's go into the Cal. When did the prep start? What was your mindset going into that? Because like you said, that was at that time, bigger name than it does now. because there weren't as many shows.
Oh yeah, yeah. You know, I went. You got to remember, I went from being a no name to making 4 magazine covers, and I didn't win the LA. I was given second place, and I do say given because it was an obvious win, but that's not my say so. That's from the people around, like Tom Platz, who said, "What are you doing in this show? You should be getting ready for the universe." That was people like Rufus Hunt, and Craig Munson. Remember those 2 guys? Craig was huge.
Yeah, he had like
he just passed away. Yeah, he had huge arms. He just was ridiculously big. And I was in between these 2 guys.
World's strongest criminal.
Yeah, he used to hang out at the pit down in Venice. And the whole saying is Arnold never liked to come down to the pit in Venice when Craig was there because it made Arnold look bad. But Craig became a dear friend of mine. And Craig, you know, he went to the individual that got first place and said, if you're any kind of a man, you need to give that trophy back to that kid Leidelmeyer because he deserved to win. So that was the LA. Because of John Grimmick putting me on the cover of Muscular Development and doing a big story on me, it exposed my name to everybody out there. Because back then we didn't have social media. We only had so many magazines. And in that magazine, I wrote what I believed from the very beginning because I was really disappointed that the sport of bodybuilding was controlled so much by a dictatorship. And I said what I said, and John Grimmick says, "You sure you want to write this in here? You have a career, and you may be cutting yourself short from a career that's going to be very prosperous for you." I said, "No, I want to print just the way I said it." I said, "There's a man on the West Coast that's seedy, greedy, and weedy, and he names every man's principles by his own name. And I want the world to know these are my principles, not his." So that's what I said. So yeah, you know, Joe Weider, interesting. We'll talk about that later. Well, so I did the Cal with
Rachel McLish. Didn't hurt you too bad. I was looking at
No, that's true because there's a couple of things that happened. There's a couple of things that happened about getting on Muscle and Fitness. Joe contacted me and he said, "Rory, I'd really like to talk to you about bringing you into a higher level of the sport." And so I said, "All right." And so Cynthia and I would go out with him and he would expose us to some of the finest restaurants in town, which doesn't sound like a lot for a man of his level, but I found out later he didn't do that for anybody else back then. So I was being exposed to these nice places and so on. He brought us to his house over there where he lived, Hancock Park, 303 Hudson Drive. That's the place he lives if anybody wants to go see the house.
That was it.
We talked, and he said, "Look, what do you want?" And I said, "Joe, what do you mean, Mr. Weider?" He goes, "What do you want from me that I could better help you?" And I said, "You know what?" I said, "Look, I'm not a dog." And he says, "What do you mean?" I said, You want to give me a condo down in Venice Beach. You want to lease me a car. You want to give me a stipend of money." And I said, "And in return, you want me to do what?" I said, "Look, I'm not sure. I don't want to be a dog in the sport. I don't want to be a one-trick pony. I don't want to be a cigar store Indian. I just want to be Rory." I said, "You put a dog in a doghouse. You put a food bowl in front of him, and then you tell him to go get your slippers. I'll work with you, but I'm not going to go get your slippers." I said, "I will not be controlled from this sport." I said, "Cynthia and I already own a home. We already are sitting very well in life. What I do want, I want life insurance. I want medical. I want a stipend to continue so I can compete, knowing I have a backup in the way of monies. And then we can consider talking." Well, that faded until one day we were at the Orient Express eating. And as I was coming out of the restroom, I heard these 2 guys going, "Machismo." And I said, "Excuse me, Machismo?" He goes, "Yeah, Hercules." And I said, oh, Hercules. Okay. He goes, no, Samson. And I went, wow, very nice. Thank you. You say, I'm that? He goes, oh, no, you're that. Well, that was Yoram Globus and Malcolm Galan, who own Canon Studios. They said, you are our Hercules. You are our Samson. We are going to put you in our movies. And I said, okay, let me introduce you to my table. So we went to the table and I introduced them to Joe Weider. And remember Dick and Mary Roberts?
Yeah, Mary was up north a few years. I was emceeing the show in Sacramento, and this is probably 10 years ago. I saw her up there. She was watching the show.
Yeah, and so Dick was trying to be a mediator between Joe and I, because I would get kicked under the table a lot from Dick saying, shut up. But I was very vocal.
Really?
I introduced these two individuals to Joe, and they left. And Joe says, whatever you want, just sign a contract. I'll give you whatever you want. So I did. I signed the contract under the guidance of the people around me. And that Monday, I went to meet with Canon Studios and with Cynthia, and I met with the directors and all that. And they had planned this big movie, Hercules 2. And I was set to go. And they were already showing me the Sinbad scripts. Well, come to find out, there was other individuals in the movie that was going to be taken out on the basis of my character and their character fighting over the Venus woman. And now my character wins out. And so it's going to be more romantic. Well, that didn't feel good for the other person. So it was brought to Joe Weider's attention. I didn't read the fine print, Lonnie. Nobody read the fine print. Joe Weider owned and controlled my name for the next 3 years.
Oh.
And when that was brought to my attention, I could no longer do anything without his say-so or agreement. And he made sure I didn't do those movies.
Shazam! Weren't you in a movie?
Yeah, I did. I went on afterwards and did other movies, and I'm getting ready for a movie now. I did one last year that's out there called Desperate, which is a lot of fun. But what I'm getting at is my world now was owned. So for the next 2.5 years, I was never seen more. Joe owned my name. Yeah, I was in Muscle and Fitness. Yes, I was in Muscle Fitness twice, but they made sure I would never be in any other magazine. Now, what happened was very simple. If you can't control something, you must own it so you can control it. The worst is if you can't control it and you can't own it, you got to get rid of it. They were trying to get rid of me in the sport. And we'll go into depth in that later, because I could tell you some insight that will blow the minds of what people don't realize about the underworld of bodybuilding. I've been there. I know what the underworld of bodybuilding is. So getting ahead of me, or ahead of our conversation, under contract in 1984, where things really got ridiculous in my life, I went to Joe's office. He wanted to see what I looked like. He says, Rory, you don't need to compete. I will make sure that you become one of the editors here for the magazine, because you have no place for competitive bodybuilding. And I went, really, Joe? I understand the subjective part of the sport. I understand the politics of the sport. But understand, no one can take away the aura that Rory has. And so I denied the idea of becoming one of the editors for the magazine. Rick Wayne made sure I was never going to be in Flex magazine.
Really?
Barry Rader made sure I was never going to be on the cover of Iron Man. Yeah. Bob Kennedy made sure I was never going to be in Muscle Mag on the cover. It was sad. It was sad. But guess what? Here I am at 70, still doing what I do. Because see, bodybuilding is innocent of all this. The politics of bodybuilding isn't. So did I ever leave bodybuilding? No. And bodybuilding never left me. And I'm here for one purpose only. The only reason I'm doing these podcasts now is because I want to help the new generation to understand the true essence of what I believe bodybuilding was, is, and should always be. And that's to be classically built. My goal is to make sure everybody understands the true male physique is a classically built specimen of human flesh that God created. You know, I always tell people in Luke 6:45, from the abundance of the heart speaks the mouth. Lonnie, you've known me basically all my life in bodybuilding. I've never, ever spoke any differently. I've always spoken from my heart. And it's always caused me a lot of turmoil with those that have the political powers. And that's why I got into head judging. That's why I got into national judging. That's why I helped Joe Valdez as a chairman of our Southern California district to better the sport. You know, that was my whole goal. So now I'm coming back to see if I can help better the sport. I'm no different than I was when I was first starting out in the sport, in the sense of trying to help the sport. And so I want to see if I can. But this new generation has to understand they are the future of the sport. You know, you look at the Olympia competitors, and I never thought that Rick Grayson's image of the Gold's Gym character was going to actually be the essence of what Mr. Olympia is supposed to look like. And you know what the Gold's Gym character looks like, right?
Right.
The round little ball-headed man with the big giant delts. Well, that's what these guys look like now, okay? Let's face it. They might as well change the Sandow trophy and make it look like the Gold's Gym logo, because the Sandow trophy is too classy looking than what I'm seeing on stage nowadays. Now, that's not their fault. It's been corrupt from the very beginning because of the weakness of the judges. I think we should have a new category. And I think there's two categories that should come back together. We should have a new category called mass monsters, and then take open bodybuilding and classic bodybuilding and put it back together. So now when you have these so-called individuals that are 300 pounds, 280 pounds, freakish looking, put them in the mass monster class. It's going to entertain the sport. Everybody's going to be happy to see the entertainment of the sport. But the true class of bodybuilding should never be any different than what open bodybuilding should have always been. So you don't open up classic physique under one category and then say, this is open bodybuilding. That ain't open bodybuilding. Bodybuilding is bodybuilding. It's got to have that aesthetic classic look. It's got to have all the body parts there, from ankles to the top of your head. You know, I'm watching these guys running around in these little posing trunks, these basket holders, and it's like they got a thong going up their ass just so they can show the cross striations in their butt. And I'm like, what are we doing? What is this sport going to? I saw the change in 1985, 86, when rap music was started to get on stage. And all of a sudden, the classic posing, what bodybuilding was all about, changed to entertainment. And judges were looking at posing as entertainment, not as a way to judge other athletes on stage. I get it. You know, Vince Taylor's an awesome poser, and he's great when it comes to doing the robot and all that stuff. John's fantastic. John Brown can entertain the heck out of people on stage. But John also knows when it comes to being on stage as a bodybuilder, you got to have a classic posing routine that shows your body, not entertain people. You want to entertain people, guest pose. But as a judge, I'm a judge. I look for, when you're posing, can you show me everything about your physique that looks aesthetically, symmetrically amazing? And that's why the judges got lazy with their posing. They didn't care. I mean, I watch judges now, they don't even look up at the people when they're posing. They could care less. They're on their iPhones. They're talking while people are up there. That's sad, because that competitor up there put 12, 18, 20 weeks to get there on stage.
I've been in the industry as a journalist now. You mentioned Don Wong. I went to go see if I could write for his magazine, like in 1980, and he kind of just shrugged me off, and like I wasn't. I'd been a sports editor of a daily newspaper, professional newspaper, won awards writing, but he told me I wasn't good enough to write for his bodybuilding magazine. I felt like Rory Leidelmeyer Part 2, and then I think I went on to show him he was wrong 35, 40 years later. But people say, what is great experience in bodybuilding. And I'm thinking, boy, this emceeing my first Arnold, emceeing the first Olympia, covering this, covering that. But you know what the greatest moments were for me? Was way back in 1983 at a little hole-in-the-wall gym called Astro Gym, where these two freaks named John Arnett and RORY LEIDELMEYER came in and were training together for the Nationals. And I just sit there and looked at that and I went, for me, I was speechless. And that's saying something. I never saw anything like it. And I don't think people realized, they knew your physique because you could see your physique, but they didn't see you training in the gym. And the weights that you and even Johnny lifted were mind-boggling. I was as stunned at your strength.
Yes.
So it wasn't just a great physique. It was a strength and power.
When Johnny and I first met, Johnny was doing the Teenage Mr. Los Angeles. I was head judging, and Joe Valdez had seen John prior, and he said, you got to look at this young kid. This kid has got some crazy potential. And so after the show, I walked up to John, and Joe introduced us, and I found out where he lived in Alhambra, which wasn't that far away from Whittier. And I said, I'll tell you what, you come down to Olympus Health Club or Olympus Gym and train there for a while. And let me see what you're all about. Well, we did that for 3 months. John came up to me and said, are we going to start training together? I said, we're almost there. We're almost there. Let me continue seeing what I see. You know, you show me what you're doing and it'll give me insight of where you're going. I always tell my students that. You show me what you're doing today and it'll give me insight of where you're going tomorrow. And I saw this character in Johnny. He never gave up. He never gave up. He kept pushing and pushing. So I said, John, I want you to do something. On this particular day, I grabbed the back of my back of my sweatshirt. And I said, hold on to that. He goes, what? I said, hold on to the back of my sweatshirt. He said, all right. I said, you see what you're holding on to? He goes, yes. I said, you're never going to be that far behind me if you never let go. And one day, I'm probably going to have to hold on to the back of your sweatshirt when I need help. And our friendship became so deep and so strong and so competitive in the gym, not to see who was better, but to push each other to be the best. And that's what you saw when you saw us in the gym.
Woo, 500-pound front squats. Oh, my Lord. Everybody would sit around. The whole gym would stop. It was like a show in itself, watching Rory and John train, and everybody sitting around gawking. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I knew why I didn't belong in this sport as a competitor. But if I wasn't sure before, I'm over in the Smith machine with no weight on it.
Well, you know, the thing about Johnny and I was that we had a resemblance. We had a physical resemblance. We had a facial resemblance. We looked at each other like, this is the future. This is the future. Because, see, not only were we aesthetically balanced, symmetrical, which you wouldn't proclaim to be a strong bodybuilder, but yet I was the strongest bodybuilder in the sport at that time. There were people that could not even come close to what I was lifting. And yet I had this aesthetic, symmetrical body because I never believed if you looked like a Frank Zane, you had to lift lightweight. And if you looked like a Bill Kazmaier, you lived heavyweight. I trained with Bill Kazmaier. We were together with Da Vinci Laboratories. We were both being promoters of this company, food science. So I thought, you know what? There's no reason to limit yourself just because of what people say. So I told John, no, we're going for it. We're going as far as we can in this sport. And we're not going to be the Arnold and Franco. We are going to be two individuals that will stay as individuals, but yet connected by our hearts. And so John was an individual, I was an individual, but yet we were like brothers. Because when Johnny entered the Cal, and I believe Johnny should have won, Mike Christian looked great. Mike's a really great friend of mine. Johnny broke down and he came to me and said, I disappointed you, did I? I said, Johnny, no, you didn't. You could never disappoint me because on stage, it's just a performance. We do not hold the results on stage. We only perform. It's up to the judges. But I'll tell you this much. If you ever need anything, I'm there for you. And I said, if you ever need a kidney, I'll give you mine if we're the same. If you ever need anything in life, I'm there for you.
I just wanted your hair. That's all.
Well, because it's still there.
I wanted the hair first, then the physique second, and then all the women's underwear that were still on the third.
The crazy thing is sometimes, like any time when we all shed hair, one day I was shedding and I looked in the mirror and I said, God, I know you know my vanity, and I know you're a comedian. And I said, I know you're laughing because as my hair is shedding, you're like going, oh, there you go, Mr. Rory. And I said, but Lord, can you please stop now? It's not so funny. And you know what the Holy Spirit said to me? Rory, for every one physical hair you lose, I'm going to give you 2 spiritual hairs. So I'm happy with what I have left.
Man, you got a lot left. Rory, let's move on. The biggest event, 1983. There was some serious training with you and John because you're getting ready.
Ooh, yeah.
Nationals in San Jose, California.
Yes.
And you talk about a lineup of powerful bodybuilders, great bodybuilders. Rory Leidelmeyer, Bob Teper, Mike Christian, Rich Gaspari, Matt Mendenhall. You're going in as the favorite.
As a favorite, I was also coaching 6 other guys for that contest. So not only was I getting ready, I was getting 6 other competitors ready for that show. So people don't know that. See, that's why I say, that's, in Luke 6, in Luke 6:45, out of the goodness of the heart, I give. Maybe I gave too much. I trained Bobby. Jesse Lujan, Scott Livingstone, Barry Clothier, John Arnita. These guys were all getting ready for the show. But I also had to get ready. But I always made sure that as a coach, I was making sure they were at their best. Now, let's get to the questions about the 83. You go ahead and I'll be transparent.
Well, it's very interesting. Do you know the Alexa? Do you have the Alexa at home? The little, you ask it questions and it responds?
No, I don't care.
Yeah, it's a little, anyway.
No, I'm not very good at any of that new stuff.
Well, either way, I had my girlfriend set it up. But anyway, I asked Alexa, this is how amazing this is, how long ago this contest was. I said, Alexa, who should have won the 1983 NPC Bodybuilding Nationals between Rory Leidelmeyer and Bob Paris? And this is the machine. And it answered, that was a very controversial decision. It went way down to the wire. And it was a question of Paris's, I think it said aesthetic physique versus Rory's much more muscular physique, something of those words. But I'm saying even Alexa knew how that sucker went down to the wire. And when I went to the Astro the week after, I never told you this. You looked numb when you lost that narrow decision. You were in a state of shock that you didn't win that show.
Yeah.
A lot of people were in a state of shock. And Paris had his fans.
You're right.
But I don't know. I looked at you in there and I said, this really took a toll on Rory, man. It kind of grabbed his soul right out of his chest to lose that 2-point decision. And the sad thing was, Rory, bodybuilding years ago incorporated a new rule where the top 2 in every class turned pro. So there shouldn't even have been a problem. You and Bob should have both got the pro card 40 years ago, and there wouldn't even have been a question about that show.
Yeah. And Johnny
should
have got a pro card too. He would have gotten with Charles Glass.
Charles Glass won the middleweight.
Because John looked fantastic. Charles Glass looked really great. Yeah, and Johnny got second.
Yeah.
And, why you saw a face that was numb, I'll tell you my face was numb. I knew that I was no longer up against an obstacle. I was up against something that was never going to allow me in. Let's face it. I'm not a grave digger. I'm not going to dig up dead bones. But I will say this, Bobby knew what happened. Bobby knows. Bobby had given me a call weeks before the show to tell me what was going down. And I said, I'm still going on stage, Bobby. You know that when Carla was going to read the official, Carla Dunlap, Miss Olympia,
right?
She said, I'm not going to read this. Go back and watch the show. She said, I'm not going to read it. And Jan Hutchins said, okay, I will. Even the hostess of the event would not read the result. You know that Clarence Bass, one of the judges, was in an elevator. He didn't know that a friend of mine had gotten into the elevator just because. And they were talking about the contest, these judges. And Clarence said, I wouldn't give Rory 8th place because I don't like him. There were a lot of judges that did not like what I represented. And a lot of them felt it was because I had a chip on my shoulder. No, it's because I wouldn't bow down to what they wanted of me. You don't remember how many times I've been asked to do guest posing spots, which is a lucrative thing if you're getting paid for it. But no, they were telling me I had to do their guest posing for free because that's the way it works if you want to move forward in the sport. In 81, America, AAU, they had to do a pre-applause and record it because they knew, ABC Sports knew that if they do it live, it would be a chaos. So they did a pre-applause because at the show, the booing was ridiculous against Tim Belknap. So no, Lon, it's nothing against Bobby. Bobby is a good friend of mine. Bobby, he was like one of my closest friends. We know his lifestyle. And I know I don't judge, but I do get a little upset when people use their lifestyle to obtain goals that they didn't deserve at the time.
Do you think that played a role in the decision?
That's all to say. Yeah, it was 2 points, but when you're placed 8th in some of those judges, your 2 points looks close. But was I really 8th? Was I really 6th? Come on.
Yeah,
that's why it was 2 points.
That's insanity. Rich Gaspari was 5th. How do you have people that great? You can't give the first 2 places pro cards, only the winner.
Yeah, and that's the sad part, and that's also the good part. I mean, nowadays we have so many. Yeah, and the sad thing for Bobby is that he never got to really go much further too. He was used also. He was used up and pushed to the side. Because it was easier for the sport to go, hey, you know what? Let's get the freaky bodies up there because that'll entertain more people. So Bob lost out also. The thing about 83, even Johnny and I had a separation of friendship for a moment, Lonnie. For 3 weeks. You want to know why I was numb? Because Johnny was staying away from me. I had to ask him one day, what's going on, John? What did I do? And he said, right, let's go into the room and talk. And I said, okay. And he said, Rory, they're telling me I have to stay away from you. They're telling me that you're going to really be a harm to my future in bodybuilding, that I have to cut ties with you. You're not. And I said, John, if you would have told me that from the beginning, hell, we could have pretended that part. We could have pretended that part at Gold's Gym, Astro's Gym, Olympus Gym, pretend we're not even friends anymore. That's fine. But we can still have the same association as brothers, like we did every Christmas at my house. All the gatherings we used to have. That's not public viewing. But in public viewing, if that's the politics of the sport, then you want to play that, I'm good with that. So yeah, the sport really, not the sport. Let me go back. The sport is innocent. It's the people that ran the sport that were deviant. That's a great word. I love that word. They were deviant people. They were in it for their own, whatever it was, for their own money, sex, power. They run the sport, and any athlete coming in has to be either involved in the money, the sex, or utilizing them for the power of something else. And I don't fit those 3 categories. I don't need your money. My my sex life is towards myself and my wife, and power. No,
that's it.
I don't need to be powerful in life because my power comes from God.
Rory, how did you feel during the pre-judging?
And so,
did you feel that you had an edge during the pre-judging, or Did you sense that they were probably going to give it to Bob? What was going through your mind as you guys are battling pose for pose on stage?
Well, see, here's the thing. No. That was entertainment, Lonnie. Bob already told me how it was going to end up. He already told me. He called me up and said, Rory, yes. Yeah. So when I was up on stage doing what I was doing, I was just doing what I was doing because it didn't matter anymore. It's like I'm running a race that I already know the result in. And it didn't matter if I cross the finish line first, you're not going to get it. But that's for Bob to talk about. That's his life. And if he denies it, he denies it. That's fine.
You know what I thought happened? And
if the NPC wants to say something like that never happened.
Well, you know, the sad thing about it, and I could be wrong, but what I sensed, because the next year in New Orleans, my Christian won. The year in 1986, Gary Stridham won.
Yep.
You were fifth, and then you were sixth. And I told somebody, it took the heart out of Rory. That 83 Nationals took the heart out of Rory LEIDELMEYER.
Yes, it did.
He's not the same.
83 pulled the heart. Yes, it did.
Yeah, and
you're right, Lonnie. You know my favorite movie, Lonnie, and if you can equate to this movie, and I know you've seen it. Jim Thorpe, All American. Burt Lancaster. Remember the movie?
Yes, I was in it. No, I'm just kidding.
Remember that Burt Lancaster's character, Jim?
Great movie.
Remember that Jim Thorpe? Yeah. And look how it destroyed him. Look how it destroyed him. That's how I felt.
I told people
I had so much to offer the sport, but the sport didn't want me.
Yeah, I said it was hard for me to describe it, but to see you in the Astro Gym after the 83 Nationals, I could see something was pulled out of your soul because it was such a devastating, even though you said you knew that was going to happen.
Yes.
Knowing, and when reality sets in, makes it 10 times worse. And then you're thinking. So the next year when you didn't.
You know, I felt betrayed. I felt like, remember Cal Scalek? Remember Cal? Cal was a good friend of mine. Remember when he did Jesus on the Cross at the Olympia?
Yeah, we should have had you up there.
And that was the end of his sport. That was the end of his opportunity in the sport.
Yeah.
Well, I felt like, you know what? I just been crucified. I just felt like I was crucified. And where do I go from here? Remember, in 1979 was the LA. I had already planned on going into LAPD. So I had already given 4 years of my life to obtain what I believed I could in the sport. Yet I was being kept from the sport. Ralph Countryman at the 81 America came up to me and said, Rory, you know you have to pay your dues. I said, Ralph, I paid my AAU card. He goes, you know what I'm talking about. And I go, wait a second. If you cross the finish line first in any race, you're the winner. He goes, that's not how we play the game here. And I thought, I didn't realize this was a game. And so in 83, you're right, I was numb. Matter of fact, how numb was I? When I got home, I put the trophy down somewhere in the living room, family room. And late that night, I walked back into the family room for a second and I tripped and I stepped on the trophy. And one of the parts of the trophy had eagle wings on it and it went through my foot. And I went, really? Now I got to bleed over this trophy?
Well, this guy was working in the gym and he was so upset with the loss that he threw down a trophy. It was a trophy that was in the gym. And he says, I wanted to be a bodybuilder, but when that man loses a contest, there's no hope for me to go into bodybuilding because there's no way in the world that physique should lose to anybody else's physique. He was intense. I can't remember the German guy. Hell, you were what, 6'2", 225 at the show, 220? How much did you weigh at the National?
228 pounds. I was
okay.
Now I'm 228 that night at the contest. And this was before all the growth. 228, just under 6'2". I mean, there was nothing more I could do. I got 3 standing ovations that night. My God, I was so exhausted. I couldn't do another standing ovation. I just fell apart. This was a moment in my life where I went, good. Now the world sees what bodybuilding should be.
Yeah, that picture behind you with the do-rag. And I'm thinking, I can't believe you took my body and put your head on it. But
yeah, do-rag.
How does anybody beat that? That's what I'm
Well, you know, because I saw you one day with that do-rag on. I thought, I'm gonna mimic you. I'm gonna mimic you. You know that do-rag. It's funny you bring that up, because even the T-shirts that I used to cut back in the 70s, you know, I mean, that became part of bodybuilding, and I was doing it before bodybuilding did it. The do-rag, Cynthia took my T-shirt and said, Rory, your hair is crazy right now. Let me take that T-shirt and wrap it around your head. That's how the do-rag thing started in bodybuilding. We would innovate. People would imitate. I would innovate. People would imitate. Great. It doesn't mean they're any less. It just means they have something to look forward to that they want to look like. You know, that even my hair for the 83 Nationals, this is cute. I was at the hair salon where I see Guy Vega, who cuts my hair. And I was in the shampoo area, and he was conditioning my hair. And this young man walks in, and I can hear him talking. And I hear they're going, yeah, I'm from Oregon. I'm here in Whittier just because of so-and-so. I have this magazine. I want you to, can you cut my hair like this? And Guy goes, come over here to the shampoo bowl. And he goes, Rory, I want to introduce you to this young man. I look up and the guy goes, holy shit. He goes, you're Rory Leidelmeyer. I was going to get my hair cut just like yours. I said, well, he's the man that can do it. He's the one that cuts my hair. That's what I wanted in the sport. I wanted to move the sport up to a level where the general public would see things and go, I want to look like that. I want to look like that.
How about that?
I want to be able to stand tall and say,
how about that picture next to that one behind you? That's a Jason Mathis photo. Jason Mathis went and stayed with you for a while at the gym.
Yes.
Remember?
I wasn't even competing anymore. I wasn't competing anymore, Lon.
Look at the size. Look at that.
I was no longer competing. I got so sick and tired of this mentality. That's 248 pounds.
Woo.
That's almost 6'2", 248. Does a mass monster override that? No. Bumstead, could you put the open division and the classic division together and get out that mass monster look? Bumstead can go up another 10, 15, 20 pounds, and he could look even better. But he had to fight his way to stay in classic physique. Classic physiques could increase in muscle mass enough to stand next to open bodybuilding if you get the Rick Grayson, Gold's Gym logo guys out. Put them in the mass monster class. Have a good time. Don't practice your posing. Get out there, flex your butt, do a front lat spread, do a front bicep, look big, be gigantic, and just, you know, hey, have a good time.
You had to flex your butt. No wonder I never had the world's longest
grassroots.
And I got nothing to flex. Rory, let's shift gears. That was a tough time. No question about it. It bothered me. It bothered everybody in the gym. But along came a guy named Tony Mandarich down the road. What was the story with Tony Mandarich?
Tony, yes. Tony was a phenom. He was fantastic. I knew his brother. I would fly up to Edmonton, Canada. There was a gym up there, Gold's Gym, that was changed to a place called Thor Gym, Mark Gagne. Matter of fact, a quick note, just to show you being an innovator. Mark Gagne had these thighs on him that made Tom Platz envious. They came down from Canada. These guys, there were 6 of them. They said, Rory, we're down here because we want you to train us. Can you come up and do a seminar? So I did, and I started training them. I met a guy by the name of John Mandarich. John was a football player for the Edmonton Eskimos. John came to me. I started training John. I started training a lot of guys from the Edmonton Eskimos. Then the Edmonton Oilers hockey team started coming to the gym. I started training them. Quick note, Mark's legs were so big, it was hard for us to get clothing that would fit us. So one day at his house, his wife was a seamstress. I saw his son, who was also a big 3-year-old, in these pajamas. And I said, who made those pajamas? And Mark said, my wife. I go, why don't you make those kind of pajamas for us? Because they're pretty awesome. And we could wear those in the gym. That's right. The clown pants came because of myself and Mark Gagne. We made the Mr. Universe clothing for the Canadian.
Wow.
For the Canadian team that year. That's how you still wear them, huh?
Still wear them.
But that's how it started. See, it came through. And the reason why I didn't go any further with that clothing, because Mark, Tim Nishi, himself, and another guy named Tim, we were putting together this company to make that clothing. But they gave Tim Nishi 10%. But then they told me, why are we giving him 10%? He's really not doing much of anything. I said, he's holding us all together. He's got a great personality. You get rid of him, I'm out of here. Well, they got rid of him. Now I'm done. I'm done with the balloon clown pants, whatever you want to call them. And guess who they call up there to do a seminar? Mike Christian. Mike loves those pants and says, why don't you give me a couple of them? I'll go down to Southern California and see if I can get them, start selling them for you. Mike ain't no fool. He just made his own, and he did very well with them, along with Gary Stridham.
Yeah, Stridham had
that's
crazy.
How the clown pants started, just like the flash dance.
I like those. Those are the only ones I can.
Crazy wear. Yep. And it really did well for a long time, and maybe they'll come back. I don't know. But how I met Tony was through John Mandrich, and he goes, "I got a young brother that has so much potential, but." I don't think he understands what potential is yet until he gets pushed. And I said, okay, have him get a hold of me. So I started working with Tony. And, Tony was unbelievable. His dedication to his training and his football, his physical dedication, just doing the work. If Tony would have had the heart of John, his older brother, in him, he would have not listened to his mind. At a young age, he was already considered one of the greatest linemen in college. Not only in college, but Madden put him on the all-pro lineman team, and he was still in college. So now you feed this young man these crazy things that he has yet to achieve, but they're already giving it to him. And so it was breaking him internally. He wasn't mature enough to understand all that yet. He was going to fight Mike Tyson. Remember that? I said, Tony, if he hits you in the rib, that's it. You're no longer 6'6". You're 5'5". He's going to break you in half. And then Kiss FM came there. They wanted to do an interview. Roy Firestone. We went to the Roy Firestone show. We started talking. But they didn't care about Tony. They cared about, hey, what about this? What about that? Are you taking steroids? Are you doing this? It's like, wait a second here, people. You're exposing something that's been around forever. It's something that's kept taboo, but you're exposing it as if Tony is the only individual doing this. And it put a lot of weight on him. And that's why.
Yeah, Tony was all centered. Like you said, everybody's
to the point where one day at the gym,
everybody's doing the same thing he's doing, but he's the one singled out.
Yes.
It's big sports illustrated story on. I mean, they really blew that out of proportion, I thought.
They did. They did it with whatchamacallit from Canada, Hunters Johnson. They didn't. They wanted Carl Lewis, the Golden Boy, to be the Olympic winner. So they destroyed Johnson. But they were all doing it. It's just that he got caught doing it. That's the point. They're all doing it, but somebody got caught. So Tony had a hard time holding on to all this and having to pretend I didn't do anything. I remember giving a seminar one time at a conference, and this president of a bank stood up, and he brought Tony's name up. This was in Canada, and I said, "Stop. A coal miner goes into the mines to work, to get a check to feed his family, but he knows he's going to get black lung. He knows it. He knows he's going to probably have black lung by the time he's 40 and may not see 50. When you look at these football players and these athletes, this is how they're living their life to obtain an income so that they can have a lifestyle that will help their families. They know it may cause them harm, but they still do it. I said, Mr. Bank President, how often do you take your family to a cocktail party? Or do you leave them at home? How many times do you go out and do what you do to obtain some kind of political status in your life that you know will probably harm you down the road? Don't point your fingers at people for what they do to obtain a goal in their life that helps them feed their family. He shut up, sat down. Tony got beat up. He became a scapegoat for the NCAA. Everything was around Tony. It was hard for him. It was hard for me because I told Tony, I'm sorry I can't get in that limousine in front of Uptown Gym with you. We're in the squat rack. You're a football player. We're going to Green Bay. I had a contract to be their strength coach, $250,000 to go up there to Green Bay to be the strength coach. Tony was getting $7.3 million, $1.3 million signing bonus. I said, Tony, if you leave, I don't know if I can continue to help you. And this is what he said. You know your $250,000 contract is taken out of my pay. I went, really? You mean Green Bay doesn't see me as a strength coach? They see me as your bellhop? I said, I ain't going anywhere. I went home and wrote a letter to Tony. I said, Tony, I'll always be your friend. I'll always be there for you as a friend, but I can't coach you anymore because I don't feel that my coaching is an asset to your future. And Tony went on his way. Now, Tony and I are the best of friends, Tony is a God-fearing man, and I am happy.
He ended up back in the NFL. He got back.
I'm happy that Tony went through what he went through to be who he is today. Yeah, Indianapolis.
Yeah,
he went to Indianapolis, fulfilled his want as a pro football player. But he's a God-fearing man now. He's got a testimony that is so strong that talks about his life and what he had to go through for all these other young athletes out there, just like myself. Believe me, I have fallen so many times, Lonnie. After 83, I've been through hell. I have gone through hell.
You were
I have died almost,
hard for me to,
I don't know, 3 or 4 times. And I'm still.
It was hard for me to explain it, but the look on your face after the 83 Nationals, it's almost like somebody was like tasered. You were sitting there like in a state of shock, like this really didn't happen. This has to be a bad dream. You know, it's just, I could see it. Like I said earlier in this interview, it was the soul was sucked right out of your heart. And I didn't feel you were ever the same after that because like, what's the use? I did everything I could. And this is I'm never going to win.
You said it. What's the use? You're right. What's the use? And so why 100% effort, Rory training? You know, I would train so hard for that moment to stand on stage, just for that moment, like in 83, just for that moment. You know, when I posed to the song from Ice Castles, if you listen to the words, that's what I was all about. That was my dad's song that he gave me. And I knew when my dad gave it to me, I understood now he understood me. And it's, please don't let this moment end. It's everything I am. It's everything I wanted. Don't let this moment end. And it ended with the standing ovations. The result, I have no control over. But the work I did, I had total control over.
Had some underwear.
And I gave it all I had. And at the end, Cynthia and I and Sasha went to the NPC Nationals. Walking there, I got to the front door, and the 2 big giant bouncers, no one's even got on the dance floor. They're all waiting for you, Rory. You are the victory party, and we're not going to start until you walk in. And walked onto that dance floor, and as soon as I started dancing, everybody came out because I realized I was celebrating the moment. Yes, I was numb, but I came to the realization that this is it. I can't give the sport anymore. because if I do, I'm going to end up killing myself trying to do more than I am.
And there's so much more we can talk about. And hopefully, in the not too distant future, I'd like to come down to Uptown Gym and do more of this interview with you. If we could ever find Carlos, I'm going to come down to.
Yeah.
Where's Carlos?
Well, we will. Promise you. If you promise me that you'll come in with a do-rag on, the clown pants, and the cut-off T-shirts that I wear, we're on.
I'll do it. I'd love to wear.
We'll do it at Uptown Gym.
I know here, but I just want to end this by saying you are still training people.
Yes,
tons of people at Uptown Gym. How does somebody get Rory Leidelmeyer as their trainer? Can somebody walk in there, introduce themselves, and say, I want you to train me, or do you have a limited amount?
Yeah, they contact me. They can get me. I'm looking. I've trained most of my life. I've trained remember Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the old Gillette, every year it came out, the Christmas cartoon? Yeah. With Burl Ives as the voice.
Yeah, good old Burl.
You know, because we're around the same age.
Yeah.
Remember the land? Yeah, remember the land? There was a land of misfit toys, and the king lion ruled that island, and he took misfit toys because he the misfit toys didn't feel like misfits. There was value in them. That's what I do. I look for the individuals that come to me that may be an outsider, an outcast, or feel like a misfit, and I prove to them there's value in them. I prove to them that there's a master that's inside of them and help bring it out. Now they have to do the work to bring that master out. How does a young, let's say Japanese 7-year-old girl play orchestra violin? They say, oh, she's no, she did the work. She did the work 100%. She focused on it. Some bring it out early in life. Some bring it out later in life. I help bring it out when the time comes.
But you have openings for people that are looking, that would like to get you as a trainer.
It's by me deciding. It's by me deciding. Yeah, but it's by me deciding. If anybody can come and see me, I had a young couple come in from Colorado last week. They just came down and said, I want to I do from my heart. I have a young couple from Texas that came out for 3 days. They wanted to see me. I do from my heart. I can help people like that. But when I get like to say, I'm Mr. So-and-so, getting into this, I had one guy come up to me one time and he says, Mike Densler used to train me. And I said, oh, that's great. It's a friend of mine. I said, he says, what do you think? Take a look at me. And I did. And he says, what do you think? I said, well, you got the symmetry of an iceberg. And he goes, wow, yeah, but you can melt the ice and turn it and sculpt something nice if you're willing to do the work. I look for people that are willing to do the work. If you're willing to do the work, I'm willing to help you. But if you're looking for something in me that's a short term, I'll get there in a hurry. I want the result. I'm not there for your result. Victor Richards, Scott, Reggie Palmer, San Martino.
You know who wrote me for the first time in 40 years? We talked 2 weeks ago, and we still been talking. 2 weeks ago, he wrote. He said, "Ask Rory who the best teenager was he ever trained," and that guy's name was San Martino. San Martino wrote me. He calls me almost daily. He got all excited. I said, I'm interviewing Rory.
Yes, yes. Sammy was awesome. Oh, he was awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, anyway. Sammy was awesome. You know, when I put him in his first show, he was so, you know, he did the California Gold. I put Bob Paris and San Martino in the California Gold Cup. Sammy won Bobby did his thing. Bobby won. When Sammy was up on stage, he was almost in tears because nobody was calling him out. And then when it was all over, he walked up to me. He says, I really feel bad. I said, they didn't call you out because it was too obvious. You were fantastic. He won the show. He didn't even have to do a pose.
Teenager you've ever trained? He said he was the best teenager you've ever trained.
Sammy was awesome. He was awesome. As a teenager, we have Sam. Well, you know, San Martino was fantastic. John Arnita was fantastic. Danny Berumen was fantastic.
I was in that group, but I was just a couple years old.
Fantastic. One other than the other? No, I'm not going to tell you. Okay. I love Sam. He had great potential. I wish he would have gone further.
Okay, well, you know what? I got a class I have to teach
But
in college, so we got to cut this short. There's so much more.
okay, well, you take care of that class. I'd love to get together with you again.
Yeah, oh, I'm coming to the gym with the do-rag, with the cut-off top, the flowered pants. I don't know what. They may arrest me before I get in there. But I'd love to. Would you mind if I came to Uptown Gym and
Well, no,
there?
no, I would love it. I'll get a friend of mine, a video photographer that's a really dear friend of mine. I've tried to get a hold of him. He just had a baby boy, Eric Ramirez. He's close to my heart too. What's coming on now on this podcast, I'm really excited about. People like yourself giving me the opportunity to be on here. Real TV Bodybuilding that has pursued me for a long period of time. People have to understand, I've been asked to do many podcasts, but why haven't I done it? Because what I do is I will put a reel up and I'll ask these podcast people to collaborate. I don't hear from them. Well, if you're not going to collaborate with me, I'm not going to collaborate with you. And Real TV has really pursued me, and I want to see it become something in a positive light. And if I can be a positive light for Real TV and with you, Lonnie, let's go forward with this. Let's go. We have
when we can set up a time. The Uptown Gym, did that close it then opened up again?
Yeah, well, you know, it had a recess, and then it reopened.
Kind of like my hair recession.
Hey, recess, but hey, it's been there 45 years, and it's a freestanding building, old town, old equipment, new equipment, old school, new school. I don't believe in any school. Like you are a professor, we teach what's real, and what isn't, we push aside. And what's real is.
Yeah, I want to set this up fairly soon, so I'll be contacting you, and you get your video guy ready, get Carlos ready, and we'll both be ready to do the work.
Well, there you go.
Do the work. Got to head out. Thank you very much, Rory, for your time. I know it's valuable. A classic interview from a classic bodybuilder. Everybody out there, hold on. There's going to be more to come in the future. But for now, over, under, we're out.